you should be able to see Clover Health investments on my page. And I'm going to walk you through some of the interesting metrics that we have on it right now. As you probably know, it's ranked pretty highly on our Short Squeeze Explorer right now. If I click over here to screens and then to the highest short squeeze scores, you're going to see that it shows up here. And it's actually ranked number 6 on the short squeeze score. And the short squeeze score is a metric that we put together that basically tries to identify, well, short squeezes, for lack of a better phrase. It looks at a lot of metrics. It looks at the short interest over float, of course, which is 38% for Clover Health, which is pretty elevated. It looks at the borrow fee rate, which is the lending rate that borrowers, i.e. people who want to short a stock, have to pay to the owner of the shares. 28% is pretty elevated as well. And it also looks at things like volume and price momentum. In order to have a short squeeze, typically, well, I shouldn't say in order to have a short squeeze, but typically antecedents to a short squeeze are a large increase in volume and pricing. And so even though you might have a high short interest over float and a high short borrow fee rate, if you don't have a lot of volume and a run up in pricing, you're not going to see kind of the short squeezes that people want to see. So all these factors have to kind of work together. And we're seeing that right now with Clover Health. That's why you have a short squeeze score of 97. So let's go back and take a look at the short interest page here. As I said, it's 97.25. This is out of 100. It's ranked 6 out of 6,700 securities right now. I'm going to kind of walk you through what we have on this page and explain to you kind of how this all works. The short shares availability is the number of shares that are available to borrow from Interactive Brokers. They publish this data and we get it, as well as a couple other sites. We update it every 30 minutes, and it's basically an indicator of how many shares are available at Interactive Brokers to borrow. And it can range from none, it could range to over 10 million. And it's a pretty good indicator to show you like kind of where things are. But if it says 0, it doesn't mean there's no shares to short in the entire world. And you have to be aware of that. But it is a good indicator. It's a sample of the entire market. The broker is a very large prime brokerage, and so it's kind of it's kind of a pulse, but I wouldn't say it's definitive. The borrow fee rates, again, they're a lending rate. This is from Interactive Brokers. Interactive Brokers is a very large brokerage, and they have a lot of institutional clients. One of the top 10 brokerages, I think, in the world, if you look into it in terms of prime brokerages. And so their lending rates are going to be competitive, even though we only have one participant here. I think you'll find that this number is probably pretty accurate. They're going to change their numbers based on market conditions pretty quickly. And so a 28% lending rate, I think, is pretty indicative that this is kind of hard to borrow. You can see a couple of days ago, it was 116%, which is very, very hard to borrow, very high, very expensive to short. And it's been declining a little bit. Before that, it was 4%. So this number, I think, is very, it's a very strong indicator of the hard to borrowness of a stock, much more so than the short shares availability. Now, I've seen a lot of rumors that Fintel only gets its data from a few brokers, and that's not really entirely true. For the short borrow fee rates and for the short shares availability, yes, we only get that data from Interactive Brokers, and we think it to be, and we're pretty public with that. But all of the other data that we get is not limited to just a few brokers, and I just want to make sure that's clear. The short volume is the total number of shares that are sold short in a given day, and we divide that by the total volume that we have. A lot of people use this as an indicator. It's interesting, but I wouldn't call it a very important indicator to indicate a short squeeze for a lot of reasons. And some of the reasons are because people, market makers specifically will sell shares short as a course of regular business throughout the day, and then buy them back whenever they need to. And so I wouldn't consider this to be a very, very strong indicator of total actual negative sentiment or short interest. But it is interesting to watch. And I think that if you look at the volume over time, like as in terms of its own history, then it's interesting. Figures to deliver This is basically an indicator that shows you how many attempts to buy a stock or to borrow a stock failed. Again, it's kind of backward looking in the sense that we only get the data 2 weeks later. So this comes from the SEC. They release the data in batches. It's daily data, but they release it in batches every 2 weeks. Now, when you start getting down here, I'm going to skip over institutional put call ratios for a second, but when you start getting down here to the short interest, then you start looking at kind of interesting stuff. We get this data from the NASDAQ and from New York Stock Exchange. This is official data. Okay, it's not just from one or two brokers. It's a very, very large slice of the market that provides this data. And, we get it every 2 weeks, just like everybody else. And, we try to publish the actual official numbers here. And then we try to provide some value added data because, for example, days to cover is something that is the short interest divided by the volume. And we get the volume every day. So we recalculate this days to cover every day in order to be able to show you like what's happening. And when days to cover is low, it means that there's a lot of volume. And if a short seller needs to cover their shares, it's not very hard for them to do that, because essentially what this is saying that in 0.13% of a trading day, and actually in only 10% of 13% of a trading day, all of the short sellers could find enough shares to buy in order to cover their 41 million shares of short interest. So there's a lot of volume there that they can cover with. So you're not going to see, probably not going to see something until this changes. Now this can change very rapidly. If you go back and look at GameStop, when that happened, it had a very low days to cover because there was a lot of volume, and then the volume really just trailed off all of a sudden, and the days to cover skyrocketed, and then you saw that short squeeze. So this is important to look at on a regular basis. And then we look at things like short interest over shares outstanding. We look at the float minus the short interest, and then we look at the short interest percentage of float. And this is an important number right here because it tells you how much of the float is available. And then down here, we have a list of funds that are disclosing short positions. Now, short positions could be traditional, I've borrowed a share and I've sold it short, which is what you're seeing here. Or we also put in here if they've disclosed a put option, which I think is what we consider to be a short position. So, that's really all I had to say about this data. It's a very interesting situation with Clover Health. It's got a high, it ranks very highly, obviously, for a lot of reasons, which I've tried to explain. But really what we're looking for now is kind of a decline in volume and an increase in the days to cover in order to be able to see something happen. So I hope that was helpful. Again, my name is Wilton Reisenhuber. I'm the creator of Fintel. And, just for the record, we're not owned by any hedge funds. We're a small operation. We have a couple engineers that work here. We make all of our money. 100% of our income comes from subscription revenue from our customers. And we have a very, very, very strong interest, a very, very, very strong financial interest in making sure that the data we provide is accurate so that our customers can make good financial decisions. So we don't get any money from hedge funds. We have no influence from hedge funds. We look at the data, we try to extract interesting insights from that data and publish it as quickly as we can in a way that's easy to understand. So if you have any questions, feel free to put your questions in the comments. I'm probably going to try to do this a couple times a month. So if you have some questions or you have some companies that you want me to cover, put them in the comments and I'll come back to them and try to do another little video on those tickers that you suggest when I get a chance. Hope that was helpful.